Welcome to a foreigner in the Philippines. Well, as you may have seen on our most recent videos, Beth has not been too well, and we went down the road last night actually to take her to hospital. Now the thing is that this used to be a fairly straightforward thing. You could go to the hospital and you'd be able to go to the emergency room, and the 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 immediate solution to all problems is to put you on a saline drip, and that would be the first thing. So they put you on that, and then they start talking about what was wrong. And but it kind of worked, because the majority of people, if they're starting to feel unwell, it can be in not being hydrated. So they're dehydrated, and so they start to feel a bit bad. Now the Filipinos they're famous for self-medicating. If you get a cut in here, well, what I've come to realize is the hilltop farmers, they have their own way of surviving on very little, because even if you go to the hospital and you're treated free, there is a fee of something. So, and in many times a fee of even 300 or 400 pesos can be just not doable. So they tended not to go there. Now, the way that things are going now is that because of the pandemic, the protocol, that's a favorite word of the Filipinos, the protocol is that you must be tested for the COVID-19. Now, I'm assuming that we're able to mention that word online now without being sent to Facebook or YouTube jail. But anyway, that's the first thing that they want to do. And the last time that Beth went to the hospital, we came in for a bit of criticism from people who are totally convinced that everything that is done medically is absolutely done under strict regulation and must be correct. Whereas our friend Michael, who went to hospital, I think probably it's a couple of months ago now, but he knew that by the symptoms, he's a Safi guy, he knew that he had pneumonia. And so he went to the hospital thinking that he would be able to get on the antibiotics or whatever that was needed to get him out of the pneumonia. Well, when he got there, they were being very strict about their protocols, and they wouldn't test him for pneumonia. So he was there and he said, I'd like to be tested for pneumonia. And they said, first of all, we have to test you for COVID. His argument was based purely on logic. He said, well, are you going to test me for cancer or TB? No. Cancer? No. TB? No. Well, then why, if I'm not showing any symptoms, would you want to test me for COVID? The argument didn't go too far. Now, back then, the quarantine facilities, shall we call them, were primitive beyond belief. They were actually outside, at the mercy of what am I looking at there? He was at the mercy of mosquitoes that were the size of 747s. So that the joy of that lasted for not very long. I don't think he was there overnight. He may have stuck it out overnight, but in fact, because they wouldn't test him for pneumonia, which he had, and he wasn't getting treated for that, so he actually signed himself out. Now, the last foreigner that I heard of that went there also signed himself out because the facilities were primitive. He couldn't get a private room. They were all taken. He couldn't get a private room, so he had to. He would have been in a cot in the hallway, and that would have been rough. So when we went last night, we were going to go to the hospital. So I'd encouraged Beth to get up, have a bath, and that's a cold water bath here, by the way. Have a bath, and do her hair and make herself look good, and she would actually feel good. That's my advice. And she did that, and she did feel better. Once we got into the truck, we had to do some other things. We had to go down to the ATM and check on whether a transfer had been made that we had made, I think, the day before. Now my own viewpoint on doing transfers in the Philippines is that you do the transfer and then you forget about it, and then maybe 2 or 3 days later you can go and check to see if the money's there. But if you start waiting on it, it's like the old it's like that old northern expression from the UK that I know of, a watched kettle never boils. The more that you watch something happening, the more that you need it to happen, then the longer it takes. And we'd found that. She had sent me down there in the daytime yesterday, said, go to the ATM and draw out what is there. I said, is the money there? Yes, I transferred it, and it will be there now. Of course, it wasn't. I waited as long as I could. I went and had lunch, I waited, and then I went back again. I went back to a different ATM. The money still wasn't there. So that was it. Failed mission. So the thing about the going to the hospital thing is that when you really want something to be done, it seems as if that produces a block which stops it from being done. Well, we were going to the hospital. We did the ATM thing first, and of course the way that it works is that it had actually come, so we were able to get the money out. So we did that, and then we got some food. Now, by this time, Beth was already feeling better. So it's that thing that I know that when I lived alone for quite a few years in the UK, I was a working member of a band that was on the road all the time. We would leave in the afternoon in London. We'd leave, catch the coach, a private coach that belonged to the band leader, and we'd go to wherever we were going to have the gig, maybe to Manchester, 200 miles. So we'd do that, we'd get there, we would do the gig, and then we'd come home and drop us at the same place, and then we'd go each go into our own cars, and we'd go home. Same again the next day. Now, if we didn't play, we didn't get paid. So no play, no pay. So it was important for me to not take time off if I was sick. So if I did feel a little feverish or had a sore throat, I couldn't have a sore throat because I was singing every night. So what I would do is I would go on a no talking. So I'd get home in the early hours of the morning, let's say on Wednesday, get home in the early hours of the morning, and now I know that I can feel that I got a sore throat and perhaps feel a little feverish. So what I would do is I would stay in. Now I would stay in and sleep, but what if I started to feel even slightly better? What I'd do is I'd get up, I'd have a bath, I'd put on clean clothes, I'd make myself look as presentable as possible, not always an easy task, and I would just not talk for that part of the day, and then I'd be on the no talking for the entire day. Then I'd go and I'd pick up the coach again for going somewhere else, Birmingham, and I'd go there. I'd keep the talking down to a minimum, and then by that time I would have had I'd have had hot water with honey and lemon, and I would have medicated myself in that way for the day. So by the time it came 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock when we were starting the gig, I'd be feeling pretty well okay. Now, Beth doesn't do that. But Beth's habit is to just retreat entirely into the feeling of having a fever or not feeling well, however you want to put that. And she would not do that. She would not get up, get washed, get dressed, all of that. She wouldn't do that. And so it's one of those, if you're doing that route and you go into the bathroom and you look at yourself in the mirror, you look bad, and that all escalates into feeling even worse. Well, anyway, last night we actually went, we got some food. She was already feeling better, so we got some food, some takeout food, because there's not too much happening at night in Taliban. I think the last person out turns the light off. It's one of those old joke. And but she'd begun to feel better, and we got some chicken, which turned out to be really delicious. So we sat in the truck and we ate our food and we drank our drink, and suddenly she remembered what happened the last time that we went to the hospital. The first thing, the hassle about refusing, getting it through to them that you did not want the swab test. Now, the swab test, it's something that's about this long, 6 inches, and they stick that right up your nose, and just the description feels invasive to me, and so I refuse that. The last time that we took a test was when some idiot had complained to the president of the Philippines, and Mr. Duterte was being required to do something about me not wearing a mask. So what happened was that the president's office sent a note down to the PNP and said, "Can you just check this man?" Well, they came up to our house and they asked us would we go down and take a test down at the port in Atafi, or was it Taliban? I think it was Taliban. Anyway, we went. They wanted to give us a swab test. We said no. So the lady, with the best of intentions, she called and she spoke to the police and said that they don't want to take the swab test, but they're willing to take the blood test. Now, the blood test is a little pinprick, and then they take a smear from the blood, and then they do a blood test. We did the blood test. There was nothing wrong, and we got through that situation. But they won't do that at the hospital. They don't have the power of making a judgment. So we're in a state of no-go, where what are we going to do? They want this, we don't want it, so what are we going to do? Well, finally, the last time, the doctor came out and he spoke to Beth, and strangely, he understood that she didn't want to take that test, and he spoke to her about what she was feeling. He recommended a course of treatment that she could get, and he wrote a prescription out, which we filled, and we went home. So we signed ourselves out. Nowadays, because of the COVID, you have to sign a waiver, and they have that on their file then for whatever happens. But it all went well in the end, and we went home, filled out the prescription, and she took it and she was fine. A day later she was just fine. She's going through the same thing now. Last night she remembered what happened, and she was already feeling a bit better, so we actually avoided going to the hospital. So this is what is happening now, is that the people that we speak to are avoiding going to the hospital because of what will be required of them, even when they know as intelligent people that they're not experiencing any of the symptoms that are being declared. So what's that called? Asymptomatic. And yet, even if you are asymptomatic, they still want to give you the test. And we disagreed, and I was accused of knowing better than doctors. No, I don't. But this doesn't make sense to me. And so we ended up last night saying, why don't we just eat our chicken and go home? And that's what we did. And she is back in. She's been resting today, and she's actually feeling better.